Yes, I have your audience. I love it. I'm very excited to talk with you, and I was very delighted to see your research on the edge of uncertainty. Whatever possessed you to look into that topic? It seems so timely today in every way related to the universe and all that's going on in the world today.
Well, it is a topic that I have always avoided, partly because I don't like the construct. So in fact, we give a lot of conferences and talks to some of our corporate partners, and like I do a lot of workshops on mindfulness, on men's groups. But I didn't want to touch the imposter syndrome just because it didn't make me so comfortable. But there came a request from Doctors Without Borders, and they had a whole international audience who wanted to touch on this topic. So my director approached me, and I said, I have to do it, but I have to frame it. How I want to frame it, but I didn't know exactly. I had some clues. So it took me, I had to take a shower, and in the shower it came to me.
I love that. The showers are fabulous.
Yes, and so I knew that there were several things that didn't fit well with the entire concept. First up, and the first one that is obvious is that it's called a syndrome. And syndrome
is usually syndrome?
No, imposter syndrome.
Oh, the imposter syndrome. That was the first thing that struck you. There was something wrong with that.
It's called a syndrome, which basically means you are ill. And you have to be medicated, and you have to go to the doctor, maybe to the hospital. And that whole construct was so unappealing that, and sure enough, what I did find, well, there is a classification of diagnostics for all kinds of illnesses and all kinds of suffering we experience as human entities. And there is something called the DSM, which is the Diagnostics Manual in the United States. In Europe, we use something called the ICD, and we are in number 11, United States in number 5. But in 1980, the DSM-3 defined for the first time anxiety as a disorder. It became the GAD, the General Anxiety Disorder. And there is a lot of symptoms related to anxiety when the imposter syndrome comes. And that was disquieting for me. I had to try to understand how we have seen anxiety throughout history.
You sounded to me, and in reading the paper, I realized you had a great breakthrough about the meaning of it. So you weren't really impressed with the anxiety focus or the medical implications or the idea that you have to be medicated or see a psychiatrist. And you had a really fundamental shift in how you understood it. So can you talk more about the difference between the medical model that's out there and what you really uncovered in your research?
Well, yes. First of all, I'm not claiming that the medical model is not valid. Certainly, there are certain cases of, and there is a definition in the DSM-5 that I mentioned earlier, that under certain conditions, and it's usually persistent symptoms that last for about 5 to 6 months, then a person can be declared to have sort of chronic anxiety, which means it's no longer manageable. The person is no longer able to regulate itself. And in those cases, I find commendable that certain medication can be used. In fact, sometimes I recommend my clients, some of them, to go to the psychiatrist because otherwise it becomes very difficult to work with them because their level of anxiety is extremely high. But also there is another type of anxiety that is not as persistent and that is more of an information signal for us. And that happens typically when we are in the learning process. And every time we are going from the I don't know or I don't know enough to the I know, there is a tension. And this tension can produce a level of anxiety.
I just want to emphasize what you just said there because I think it's key to your understanding because it makes it more what you're looking at here is that uncertainty and doubt is more of a human condition and it's relevant to each and every one of us as almost like a signal that we're moving between that place between what were the two? I don't know, or what were those two again?
Yeah, moving from I don't know or I don't know enough to
Right.
I know or I can make a decision about something.
Right. So in other words, that I don't know creates the anxiety. And what your point is that that's actually at the edge of learning and which hasn't been fully recognized or valued, right?
And that is perfectly healthy. It's important, in fact. It is how we as humanity evolve. We are
Right.
constantly creating knowledge. And if you look at the neurobiology of the brain doesn't respond as a result of 100% certainty. It's always predicting errors. So even when you make a particular action, the brain will make its best possible prediction. So even the brain is wired for uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, obviously you have doubt. And doubt is a very positive, if not elegant energy. So it's important to recognize
How is doubt an elegant energy? How is doubt an elegant energy? I don't like it myself. I'm always sort of on the edge of uncertainty and doubt.
You can bite your nails, or you can say, "Aha, I am in doubt. This is important."
Yeah. I think you pointed out that the recognition of that was a key signal to that. Oh, I've got an opportunity to learn something here, rather than I can't do it. I'll never learn it. I'm total fake. I'm gonna get found out, and all that other stuff we do to ourselves. So that's really. So where were you going with that?
Well, I also, because this is such newer way of understanding it, which came from 1980s. I also wanted to examine how we approach that through philosophy and through religion in much earlier contexts. And in summary, it's in my chapter 3. I'm not going to summarize it, but the approach has usually been that anxiety is this vehicle that presents itself at that threshold of knowledge.
Say that again, Daniel. Anxiety is what?
Is what presents itself at the threshold, at the boundary of knowledge.
Knowledge, at the boundary of knowledge. That's a great quote, yeah.
Or at the boundary of insight.
Yeah, insight.
In Zen Buddhism, we have the famous word insight, being able to have an aha moment. And you sometimes go to the monastery and you are given a koan, a phrase, a metaphor to work with, so that you can, at some point in your life, get the realization. And sometimes this takes you 10 years. But what you are doing really is you are learning to regulate your nervous system so that you can finally arrive at the point where you are regulated enough. Then the insight comes relatively easy.
So when you looked at this, you went through several different religions and you came up with their philosophies and how they've handled doubt and uncertainty. Can you just touch on those each briefly? Because I thought that was also a fascinating part of your paper.
Sure. Let me go through the main ones. In Buddhism, for example, the problem is defined as suffering. The problem that is, Siddhartha, the historical person, goes out there and finds all these people getting old, people getting sick, and he has never been exposed to this. So he needs to find an answer for this. And that was his challenge until he realized that the reason why people were suffering was because of attachment and because of creating increasingly a gap between what I want to be and who I am.
That's a really good point. So it's kind of like the ultimate estrangement from the divine.
You could call it that. Although in Buddhist terms, we won't talk about the divine.
Okay.
But you can talk about the divine from the Christians,
Yes.
At the earlier Christian philosophy, they always talk about this signal, this as a sort of restlessness, existential restlessness that could only be fulfilled by proximity to the divine. That was the construct of the earlier Christians. It moved on later when you look at Kierkegaard, when you look at Paul Tillich. Certainly it moved to a different degree. Paul Tillich talks about the courage to be completely yourself, which is identifying yourself with your true gift. And to get there creates also that tension, because it's an existential question. Who am I? Who I really am? And all philosophers from Vedanta period to today begin with this question, who am I? We all come from this. That in itself is a tension.
So after you looked at some of these backgrounds, I think you found that this whole inquiry, this whole line of inquiry has been around since ancient times, and the labeling of it as an anxiety or imposter syndrome is a very new kind of idea that really hasn't incorporated fully some of this earlier history. So when you started incorporating it, what did you come up with? What was your kind of like aha moment in looking at this, and how did you restructure it so that it fit more your understanding?
Well, a couple of things. I think the first one that was obvious to me very quickly was merely linguistic. How we can shift meaning by simply using fancy words. So originally, the imposter phenomenon was the original name. It was developed by two lady psychologists, Clance and Imes, in 1978, who look into this pattern of intense concealed feelings of fraudulence that they've had when they were faced with achievement and they could not appropriate themselves the fact that they were actually perfectly capable of being high achievers. So it was this feeling of self-doubt, of fraudulence by these women. So it was originally observed in women. Later on, more research was done, and it was deemed that it was not just women, it was more of everybody else. And then somebody, I don't know whom, I haven't found out, decided to change it from imposter phenomenon, which was a more appropriate name, to imposter syndrome. Maybe it sounds fancier, but syndrome is what you use in the medical field for things that you have to go to the hospital. And thing is that and also is something that a lot of people relate to in many environments, and I've come to groups where they say, "Oh, I have imposter syndrome," and I scratch my head because I have to explain the fact that imposter syndrome is more of a natural anxiety that comes because of the way how we are managing uncertainty.
Oh, that's a brilliant insight,
And
really.
that if we learn rather that how to manage being at the edge of uncertainty, so, and I develop a model in my paper, then it's a entirely different view,
It is.
and
It
it
is.
doesn't have
Well,
to
one of the
do.
things I noted that you said was that our cognitive ability, in order to, in terms of understanding this, can actually expand. We're not just in one view, we're this or we're that, but we can actually expand our cognitive knowledge to better equip ourselves to deal with the unknowing in a way, the unknowing. And I am interested in your cup theory because that seems to be the thing that pulls it all together in your research.
Yes, well, the model, I made it curved. At the bottom is I don't know. At the very top is I know. But in reality, I'm arguing neither of these is possible. You cannot really know 100%. You can really not know 100%. And in between those 2 points, there is the uncertainty line. But right at the beginning, from the I don't know to the uncertainty line, there is this bubble that I call doubt. This is where doubt begins. And the doubt I prefer to call the I don't know yet.
Oh, I love that. I don't know yet.
So adjusting the language will save you a lot of grievance.
Absolutely.
That if you say, oh, I'm just an idiot, I don't know anything, rather than I'm constructing new knowledge. So that line I call the cognitive bandwidth potential. And what I'm saying also is that cognitive bandwidth is not only individual, but it can be also organizational. And there are certain organizational environments that can either facilitate or restrict that cognitive bandwidth.
Like, for examples, tell me like a little example about that, because I think it's also true in nations and movements and all that kind of thing, where you're either going to adopt an ideology or there's one way of being in this corporation, we all do it this way, or we have the opportunity to explore, maybe to make some mistakes and correct ourselves and choose a better way. How have you seen it in organizations, and how can an organization work to actually in a leadership way to encourage the employees to really work with this process and to expand their cognitive ability to take in different information and learn, and not to have that great anxiety that they don't know.
And it's important to recognize that it's important to reduce unnecessary cognitive load. So we need to be able to work with sufficient amounts of information and manage it through minimizing distractions and interruptions, which is basically means creating the space where you can have quiet focus and periodic collaborative work or engagement with others. And this frees mental resources, especially for complex tasks. So minimizing distractions, having a space for personal focus, that's a very important one. But the one that you were talking about has to do with providing psychological safety. I call it providing psychological safety. So that there is the ability for team members to voice uncertainty, to be able to say, I don't know that, or I'm not sure about that, challenge assumptions, and take certain interpersonal risks without fear of being punished. These are very important because some organizations, and actually you can see as the HR models in many organizations, they tend to hire people by cognitive profile, whether the cognitive profile fits within the organization. Even if there are people that are far smarter and far more capable, but they are simply too disturbing.
Yeah,
Because
right,
they
right,
have the ability to challenge the
right,
assumptions.
right,
So there are a few case studies on this, but I didn't go into the case studies in the paper.
right. You know, it's just
Um,
interesting from your experience and what you know. So let's just let's leave all of this aside just for a minute now, and give me like your your own aha moment, and just give me the little summary of what was really meaningful to you about writing, researching and writing this, and how you see it might be helpful for others. Just go into it and take your paper away and get off of that out of your head and into your heart thing, and let me know, just Daniel Espitia, what was so cool about this, because I read it and I was pretty excited about it, and I thought you had some really good breakthroughs that were very relevant to the time. So could you just, just as yourself, just share some of your excitement about that and what you found, and how you think it's relevant now?
I think the most important thing for me, and the reason probably I had avoided it because I was uncomfortable with this, was to recognize that uncertainty is a very important part of life, and it's a very healthy part of life. And that
So
the
key.
anxiety that sometimes we have as a result of dealing with uncertainty is a very healthy uncertainty. It's a very healthy anxiety. Because in a way it signals the movement, the need, the internal movement, both cognitively and both in terms of organismic intelligence, towards finding a response. So that probably was for me the key takeaway. This was the most important for me. Now, in the paper that I'm writing right now, I'm going specifically into anxiety in much greater level of detail. But anxiety is not always, but it is present a great deal of time. And anxiety and doubt are its companions. They are
And
travel
actually, you could
companions.
argue that it's a really positive, creative, inventive, innovative system for new learning and insights and inventions and all kinds of stuff. If we knew it all, we wouldn't actually be creating anything. So it seems so inherent in our creative aspects as human beings, explorers.
Yes, and this is how we create. And I was reading about poets. I forgot her name, unfortunately, Rosen something, who was saying how she will go into the fields. She used to live somewhere in the Midwest, and with her pen and paper, and she will go and see the poems coming down the hill, and she had to start writing them.
Interesting.
And then there was a moment where she could see some of the poems, getting away on the other hill, and she will catch them by the tail and write them down. But then she realized, because she caught them by the tail, she had to put them, upside down so that they will be all right. But this is that kind of creative tension.
That is so great. That's such a great way of looking at the creative process.
Yeah. And this is what allowing ourselves these creative moments, and dance with that anxiety is basically the model that I'm offering.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm quite aware that there are physiological, sometimes neurobiological, sometimes genetical conditions that can cause anxiety to overload the central nervous system, and that it maybe need to be treated, and there is a whole range of the general anxiety disorders.
That sounds like a very balanced approach. And it's actually, but what you actually brought back into the balance is the whole knowledge that it is a regular kind of inherent thing in being human. And I really think that that was missing in the whole argument. So I wouldn't, I don't think it's an overestimate to say that most people experience anxiety in today's world, and they don't, maybe it's at an escalated level than maybe they think they should or would or could have, but it's really a helpful reframe to say this is what everybody has. And then sometimes you go off of that spectrum and you need actually more assistance. But to frame it as like a regular condition of being human, I think is very, very freeing. And
it's more like a messenger.
Yeah.
When I started my talk with Doctors Without Borders, I first ask everybody, have you ever experienced anxiety? And everybody looked at each other, and someone said, I don't think I cannot remember any moment in my life when I didn't experience anxiety.
Yeah, very good point. That is such a great, that must have opened up the meeting very well. Yeah, yes. Where'd you go from there?
Then I told them, congratulations, this is a very good force.
That is great. I bet they loved what you were sharing with them, though.
Yeah, well, it gave them an alternative framework, which I think is the idea. I think we have pathologized anxiety too much. And imposter syndrome is just as guilty, just because of the linguistics that we have used to describe it. So instead of, it gives us room to create maladaptive phrases against ourselves.
Yeah.
Whereas what we actually need to do is exactly the opposite, create gentleness in our own language towards ourselves.
Yeah, it also opens up the pathway for leaders, because a leader who is really aware of this phenomenon, that what you're identifying in themselves, can actually share it with their teams, and then they can help each other, because I may be seeing something, I may be in the I don't know, and I'm pretty scared about that piece, and you're in the I know already piece, and we can actually work together more collaboratively to support our learning. That's what I loved about the idea that in working with this model, you can actually expand your cognitive knowledge about what you know and what you don't know, and that gives you more creativity to explore further, rather than just being in fear and intimidation that you don't know and you're going to screw up and everybody's going to know you're a fraud.
Agree. In fear and intimidation, there is very little room for creativity. It's more like in playfulness, there is more room for creativity. And in creating an environment in which you are allowed to disagree, and you are allowed to present alternatives, and you are allowed to challenge assumptions. That is very healthy. Yes, well, my background is varied. I'm Daniel Spitia, and I have been doing therapy for the last 30 years, but in the meantime, I was doing other things. Only for the last 5, I have been a full-time psychotherapist. And my central core of work is Gestalt therapy, but I also work with systemic family therapy. I do a lot of couple therapy work. I'm also working as a clinician in a psychosomatics clinic in Prague. And so we have a team looking at patients from all the different angles, both the medical, psychiatric, and the psychotherapy. And then I also have training in hypnotherapy that I use from time to time, especially for psychosomatic issues, whenever it's necessary. And there is a very close relationship between hypnotherapy and Gestalt therapy linked to mindfulness, which is Buddhist psychology training, and that I've been doing for many decades.
I love that
but
focus.
Always informally, you know.
Yeah.
Tibetan Buddhism, then I studied Theravada Buddhism, and then I studied Zen Buddhism. Um, eh, and I also have neuro-linguistic programming. So that gives me sort of the encompassing map of my practice.